We've gathered a team of leaders from Australia's property building and design community at Living Edge in Melbourne to count down the top 10 architectural statements for the year in Victoria and Tasmania. There's a common theme, and that's craft and quality. And that comes through not only in the design, but also in how they're built. They're built to last and they're built for a lifetime. First up, project number 10, where Brett McKay of McKay Timber admired the constrained but ingenious design.
Working into such a tight wedge, using that whole block to try to put a usable, practical house for a family on it. They've literally had to think outside the square.
You might think there's camera trickery going on here, but in fact, this is a very unusual site. What's it made up of? It looks like all the bits of the old house.
These are the exact old bits from the house. So all the fence palings you can see here and every sort of flaky weird bit that I've just knocked off there, these are all from the original house. The other great unusual thing about this particular house is that the site is a very pointy triangle.
Well, I am so intrigued to see how you have squeezed a family home onto such a tiny little site.
It's a very compact space, so we had to make sure that every single inch was used as well as we possibly could. It's organised in half levels. This is the memorial toilet, which is directly over where the old dunny was. And then when we come up half a level here, we're in the living room and the dining room and the kitchen. From our walk outside, you could see that there is no outside space at all, so there's no yard. So in a lot of ways, this also had to be the yard. This is our lawn, as well as the actual garden that Mick and Jess have been making here with the plants coming out of the aquarium and the hanging plants sort of like creeping down into the space.
Some of our older buildings are such a challenge that they wait years for the right person to fall in love with them. Fortunately for this house, Mick and Jess came along. And fortunately for them, they found an architect who could solve the puzzle.
Kim Rowan of Cementel praised a confident number 9.
I love the architect's passion with this one, and you know, he himself has admitted that it was a bit of a risk with some of the materials that he's used, but you know, when you look at the design detail that he's gone to, it's actually worked really well, I thought.
It's like a building with two different faces.
At the rear, the extent of change to the original warehouse was so great, we were able to change it completely.
And what an expression, all of this sculptural concrete.
I think this might be the best facade we've done. To make the space come alive, you need light. And so we set the top level of the building in from the boundary walls and created these glazed skylights. I was so nervous designing this kitchen, and even at the last second I wavered. I wondered whether I should do it or not, because if it didn't work, I'd be in trouble. And we took the risk, and I'm so glad I did. We wanted to create a space that was completely different than the rest of the house. And the role model was the English study. In this room, the windows are much smaller. The walls are mainly made up of timber lining, and what that does is cocoon you. This is the room I longed for during the design and the construction.
From humble beginnings as a factory, the architects have created a beautifully luxurious space, but still kept an intimacy that makes it a home.
Breaking new ground in Australia, project number 8 impressed David Maiolo of Rhoda.
This isn't a new idea around the world. It is quite new to Australia, and we're finally caught up that you see this sort of stuff in Hong Kong and New York, all these vertical schools, and it's a way of the future and something that we're just going to have to come accustomed to.
As our city population moves ever upwards, our schools need to follow. We are going to look at Victoria's very first vertical school.
Very much driven by contemporary teaching practices which are changing dramatically. So for instance, what we have here is a group of 3 teachers, 75 students, so it's the same ratio as the 1 to 25 of a classroom. It's a pretty intense environment. So we have the Tullamarine Freeway, we have the light rail next to us. It has very different environmental impacts, if you like, noise. So what we have here is a school that can be opened up or can be shut down and fully air-conditioned. When you're thinking of a vertical school, you really have to reimagine what a school should be.
And that's why these spaces become so important, don't they, as the sort of circulation, the vertical circulation
It's a fundamental difference between vertical schools, if you like, and the traditional schools. In a tight site like this, every square metre has to really work very hard. And so you have to find all of those opportunities that you can to get spaces like this, which is a full-scale outdoor hard court. We're actually standing on top of an indoor hard court.
So you've stacked them one on top of the other. This project is a first. It's broken the mould of a traditional primary school for a whole new generation of inner city kids.
We've gathered at Living Edge in Melbourne to count down the top 10 architectural statements for the year in Tasmania and Victoria. Leading the judging are Ken Slattery of Cement, Concrete and Aggregates Australia and Blake Tasker of Lysart.
Architecture is alive and well in these two states, and that is absolutely evident through the projects that we've judged today.
I think the climate in the southern states really delivers a different sort of architecture, perhaps a little bit more closed in than we've seen in other states. More reliant on the interiors of the building.
The complex needs for project number 7 led to a unique design brief, which Aidan Mawhinney from Living Edge just loved.
Under its very striking facade, which obviously externally looks amazing and attracts a great deal of attention, I think the architects have done a wonderful job here and how they've dealt with 3 different parties to connect 3 very different buildings into one.
Architects will tell you a good building should tell its own story. Just one look reveals its purpose. So what's this one tell us? So Ian, for an old university, this is not a traditional university building.
No, it's a new building and we've conceived of it as a kind of Wunderkammer.
A collection of wonderful objects in a cabinet.
That's right, because the faculty and the university have a collection of objects which they use for teaching, which are spectacular. Part of it is a new building. We're looking at the new building here, but an existing ground floor and 2 other buildings on the campus which are existing that we've got to tie in.
What's new and what's not?
Well, for instance, this is a 1990s building, an existing building. We've put this new brickwork with the rough mortar joint.
It's like you've ghosted it on the front.
Oh, well, it's funny you should say that. That's what we call it, the ghost house. We took the new cloister and wrapped it around and brought it round, bringing the stair down to our level here. We've made essentially a Renaissance courtyard. And last year it was booked out by the whole of the university and the faculty, so much so that they had to sort of stop people booking it. It's so popular as a space.
So suddenly it feels like we're in a museum.
This space is a highly controlled environment, so it's temperature controlled, humidity controlled, solar controlled, and it's all about protecting the objects that are in here. It was really a push from the faculty around giving students a reason to come to campus and giving them a learning experience that can't be replicated online.
Architecture is about so much more than a slick facade. Here, 2 architectural firms had the challenge to design differently. The teaching is different, the learning is different. And we know that because it's literally stamped on the box.
This is a good example of Tassie architecture at work for the environment that it's in. You certainly couldn't have anything too outside the square when you're dealing in such a ecological area.
This could be the ultimate architectural challenge, designing a building to sit within a World Heritage context.
It all started around about 20 years ago when the owner was hiking along a beach just out here actually with his daughter and saw these 1940s derelict industrial buildings and thought they would make fantastic accommodation. This place we're in at the moment originally housed the big pumps that pump the water from this lake to the power station 30 kilometres down the road. If you look through this glass floor, you can still see some of the original pumps.
And so this is the retreat.
We've designed it so it doesn't even look like a building, and we've kept as much of the vegetation as we possibly can. We actually prefabricated the structure down in Hobart, and then we trucked it up here and we craned it in over the top of the trees, which allowed us to have minimal site disturbance.
The northern-facing windows bring in lots of light. It invites you upstairs to the big reveal. When we move back up into the bedroom, it's one step up. We want the guests to slowly start to retreat. See, as we wandered down through the path, through the nature, and you come to this final platform, another different form of retreat.
Architecture is often about designing for the small details of daily life, but in this project, it's about celebrating the extraordinary.
It's great that the community has embraced this public building because it is very different to the heritage buildings that are in the area already.
The alternative could have been just a simple, square, boring library box, and I like the way that they've gone away from that.
What happens when you drop a spaceship in the heart of a regional city? How'd you come up with this crazy design?
We're in the Heritage Precinct, right next to the Unintentionary Gallery in the Town Hall. If you look at that, and then you also look at the fact that it's a library, the great tradition of libraries is the great domes. We've heard lots of different analogies. A golf ball, the cracked egg, the Death Star. Building civic buildings, you're actually building a community legacy. And they have to be beautiful, they have to bring joy and wonder. I mean, why do people go to Venice to see remarkable buildings? That's our version of what this is.
We're located on historic Johnson Park, very significant to the local traditional owners, the Wadawurrung people, and we worked with them in the design of the building, and during that time they told us the story of how Johnson Park used to be a wetland, and the Wadawurrung would gather natural resources for food but also share knowledge.
Bruce, your council made a significant investment into this building of $20 million. Did you get your money's worth?
Yes, we think we did. I mean, it was a huge amount of money at the time. We had great support from the federal and state government, but the people have voted with their feet and they've come in numbers that we couldn't have predicted, and it's been fantastic. It's not just the external, it's also the internal fit out and what it offers the community. It's world class and it's been a collective effort, but it's a great result.
We're counting down the top 10 architectural statements for the year in the southern states.
Our projects from Victoria and Tasmania are both from urban and rural environments, and they're across a variety of different applications, be it residential, commercial and civic.
We've got a really good group of people sitting around the judging panel today. We have a state government architect, we have material group representatives, we have design industry representatives. I think these are a great group of people to be judging these really interesting projects today.
The siting of this particular project and its use of materials really treads lightly on the environment and actually pays great respect to the Aboriginal community, of which this was a particularly sensitive project.
Australia's extraordinary landscapes have captured people's imagination. The question for architects is, how do we tell their stories?
We wanted to bring people out on country and get them to understand our culture and express our link to country. So we got the managers, the public service managers, and said to them, the community wants to develop an enterprise, a tourism enterprise. We got a phone call from Matt and Poppy, and yeah, then we went on to be the team that built these wonderful structures. I wanted to like the design to when you go to the theatre, then the curtain opens and you see what's on stage, all the backdrop.
These little sleeping pods are like a tiny version of the main entry.
We referred back to the source material a lot, and George Augustus Robinson, who was a 19th century missionary, he described a large dome that catered for 22 individuals, which is the dimension of the main dome, and then these smaller domes are based on what he called beehive huts. There was not a tree cut down. Every tree was sacred, and we use that to start to site the experience. And a lot of the sensibilities that the Land Council have and the Aboriginal community have feed very well into the kind of language of the very best sort of architecture that we wanted to produce.
This project is unique. It's a meeting between the oldest continuous culture in the world and contemporary architecture.
The Circa Apartments is a really interesting project. 42 apartments built in a neighbourhood of 1930s and 1940s houses.
Medium density development in Australia is going to become more and more of a reality, and this is a great example of how the design of that development can be catered to the end user, but also be sympathetic to the surrounding suburb in which it is located.
Let's face it, the design of most apartment buildings is driven by budget alone. They lack flair and personality. But this one begs to differ.
We looked at a number of houses in the area and looked at all the common themes amongst them. And if you take this one, for example, over here, it's lots of masonry, built in the masonry tradition, really expressive window treatments, lots of light and shadow, deep balcony reveals, and then we've brought them across here and used them and expressed them in a much more contemporary manner. And there's 42 apartments packed in behind this, what appears to be 2 houses.
We wanted to create a building that was quite different to anything else about, and we wanted an iconic building that really made people stop in the street and want to get out and have a look at it. And this is what we got, and we're thrilled to bits with it.
So Danny, this is very different to the apartment I've just seen.
We actually purchased 2 apartments and merged them as one. It's a great space for us. It's a 3-bedroom apartment. We feel part of the community. We're close to parks. We're close to the shops and the cafes, and more importantly, the local schools for my 5-year-old son.
What is most unusual about the Circa apartment development, and what I love most, is that Jim the developer, Simon the architect, have actually considered, above all else, the owners. Imagine that.
We're down to number 2 in our Victoria and Tasmania countdown.
This is a very special home for a number of reasons. It's got high quality craftsmanship, very good finishes and excellent material choices.
The level of attention to detail displayed by the architect, the addressing of the client's needs, really was something that made this project stand out above the others.
When the owners found this 150-year-old Melbourne terrace, not much could be saved. But that gave the architect a really unusual problem. So Andrew, help me out here. What is new and what is not?
Well, actually, the only part of the building that's original is the facade. You know, we ask ourselves our questions, if we've got to replace it with something, we've got to replace it with something better. You'll see we've got these cornices here, and you'll see those curves throughout the house as we walk through it. And we've even got things like these skirts here, where we've done them in solid oak, and we've got these lovely dovetail pieces.
So you really laboured the detail, a little like they did in a Victorian terrace.
So Tim, here we've come through into the extension, so to speak, and you'll see where we used to have the large cove ceilings in the front room, we've now got the flat hand-painted timber ceilings.
So the timber's like a beautiful Danish sideboard. This is stunning.
It's glorious. It's lovely chestnut veneer.
So this is where a lot of that craft seems to come together, a classic dressing room, but it's so rich.
Yes, well the fun in this project was finding people that can actually do a lot of these finishes and details that we discussed in the office. You know, we've got this lovely lady that does these pre-aged mirrors out in the suburbs.
These are extraordinary. This is like from 1923. And then there's this serene space here over the stairs.
Yeah, exactly. That's what's beautiful about doing a renovation, Tim, is that you get the opportunity to do some more one-off moments that you won't get to do in a new house sometimes. Anyway, let's dive back in. It's easy to forget in this house that it's actually in inner city Melbourne, and it's a terrace house that we have here. So when it came time to putting any sizable pool in, the only option was to go down.
How do you reimagine the craft and detail of another time today, when all you have left is the front facade? The answer is set some rules, be playful, and always leave room for some restraint.
And now, the number 1 architectural statement for the year in Victoria and Tasmania.
It's taken consideration in mind very early on and been well thought out in terms of how it integrates into the existing property at the front, but then also flows out into the backyard.
What made this project really stand out is the level of attention paid to the past, but also to the needs of the future and those tenants who will be living in the building in times to come.
When an architect works on a heritage-listed adaptation, we look to the local references for our inspiration. Hi Matt, what an amazing heritage-listed terrace this is. I imagine you had a load of heritage constraints.
Well, we did, Susie. It's an old 1872 building. It's a heritage, A1 listed heritage building. We had Heritage Council to deal with. We had 4 different neighbours conditions to deal with, and we had the client's needs themselves. And often the client and the heritage architect are diametrically opposed.
So what did you actually have to retain in this part of the house?
Well, we had to retain the front 2 rooms. We had to retain all the old mouldings. We kind of restored and conserved the old mouldings and lacework. We also restored the staircase. This is one of our favourite parts of the building, Susie. We love the way it transitions from old to new, and the way you come from something refined into something more expansive. It kind of exhales out. We've designated a new space, we dropped down a level, and then we've actually brought it off the boundary. And that's about a counterintuitive thing. Sometimes a little bit less space with a view out to a garden seems like a whole lot more space.
It's given you an amazing opportunity to have fantastic northern light, cross breezes, a beautiful Japanese garden, and yet still ample space for a living room.
Exactly right. Had we gone to the boundary, you wouldn't get any of that light or air, and now we've got northern sunlight.
Matt, I love what you've done in the new addition, the recycled brickwork running up into the roof, and the fact that you've been really respectful to the neighbouring properties. Was that a heritage requirement?
Indeed it was. They wanted us to be sympathetic to the original, so we've completely scooped out the ground floor level. It's about a contemporary way of living, inside, outside, light, air, space.
This house is at one with its architectural and interior design narrative, a stunning adaptation that not only reveres its history, it enthuses about its future.
Next episode on Australia by Design, the top 10 architectural statements for the year in South Australia.